the fast-paced world of technology, Agile organizations are constantly responding to change. If you've been listening to our previous episodes, you'll know a bit about how Agile tribes work now, alongside Scrum Masters, product owners, and the development team. You know, the team of really clever people who get the work done. They chip away at the backlog of work, day by day, and ensure that we're putting out great products consistently. But there is one role that often gets overlooked in an Agile organization. I'm referring, of course, to the CEO. Granted, they may not be able to give you a detailed breakdown of how Scrum works or what ceremonies happen when, but they must always have that customer-first mindset, that vision of tomorrow, and that insatiable drive for growth. Today, I speak with Alf Wallis, CEO of Voyager. We discuss the origins of Voyager's Agile journey, where the company is today, and Alf's vision for tomorrow. Alf, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Good to be here.
Great. Take us back to the beginning of our Agile journey, if you would.
Right from the beginning for Voyager?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So you've been here the whole time?
For the Agile, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Been with Voyager for just over 6 years. Voyager's first, exercise with Agile goes back some years ago, where we had a CTO and a CIO, and the CIO had experience with Agile, and through that, he was keen to implement it into Voyager. And the CTO was keen to get more development happening in the space, so he was very supportive of it as well. But as an organisation, we missed the boat, because what happened was our CIO went and put some Agile practices into the development team, and of course they may have done some things differently internally in that space, but nothing really happened outside of that department. So as a consequence, it didn't really deliver a lot of value into the organisation, because the rest of us were expecting them to do things or that, but the rest of we didn't change.
So why Agile in the first place then?
The CIO was able to convince us that it was essential for him and his team to be able to deliver more value. We weren't getting productivity, also. That's not fair. We weren't getting the outcomes that we needed for the organisation, and we felt things were just stalling around the development team. And it wasn't so much the people, it was actually the whole process from what we wanted as an outcome all the way to delivering it. And so it was all done very piecemeal. So we would have a desire to have a particular development around maybe a product, and that product would require some system engineering, some network engineering, maybe some internal systems changes, and of course a developer across it all. And we were sitting back thinking that this was all about actually handing it over to the development team and just give it to us.
Right,
wrong.
It didn't work that way.
Big wrong.
Yeah.
Then the next part of the journey after that came about when we had someone join us and was part of the executive team, and it was a company that we'd purchased. It was Conversant, and they had done Agile in their business, and it had worked really well for them. And he was a big supporter of it. He'd done a lot of research on it. Cameron wasn't particularly well versed on Agile because they'd only done it in one place, but they were able to demonstrate very clearly the whole value. But it wasn't about a development team. It had to be an entire organisation. We had to become an Agile organisation, that it was a pull type approach or a demand exercise.
So you couldn't do it in silos.
You couldn't do it in silos. It needed to be top-down supported, not from a department trying to drive it outwards. It had to come from the top. The executive team had to buy into it. Each department had to buy into it, and we had to be supportive of it.
So what happened next?
So what happened next was we got an external consultant who was a friendly person that our organisation knew and trusted within our engineering and our development teams. And he put together a structure that we then got the rest of the organisation to buy into. And we then went away and implemented it. In the same process, we employed a CTO that was well versed in Agile, and so he was able to facilitate the plan rather. So he was able to execute on the plan.
How hard was it to find a CTO who actually had the Agile background?
It wasn't easy, but it wasn't hard either. A lot of CTOs, certainly at that level, had a pretty good understanding of Agile. It's been in their, particularly in the CTO space, it's been in their world for quite some time. So yeah, at a CEO, and certainly from my background, CFO, it wasn't. I was familiar with the terminology, but really had no experience in it. So,
right.
So if I was trying to find a CFO, yeah, I probably would have struggled. But trying to find a CTO with that experience, most of the people that we were looking at had that. But the person that we found, or that we put into their team, was very versatile, or very experienced in it rather, and he was able to. He'd done it with a couple of organisations already.
Right, so he came in with the experience, the know-how. So then, how did that move the progression of Voyager's Agile journey?
Well, that's when we started to learn about having a Scrum Master, and then so that was part of the structure that had been agreed upon. So he was able to immediately start employing Scrum Masters, set that team in motion. Before he joined us, we got him across the plan so that he endorsed it, so he knew what he was coming in for and that he was going to need to make this plan happen, which he did. He loved it and fully endorsed it. We got on with that. Then after that, it became clear that product owners were the next step, because the product owners were the link to actually the executive team. So we were still having the problem, even after doing that first step, was that we had a gap. So we had our Scrum Masters managing the cross-functional teams, and we had the cross-functional teams grouped appropriately. But we then discovered that we were still having a gap between what we were wanting as strategy, what we were wanting as outcomes. Getting that to these teams in a manageable way was proving very difficult. It was still somewhat piecemeal.
So what was it that the product owners brought to this, to this ecosystem?
What the product owners did, they brought a customer perspective. They brought a deep understanding about what the market was, what was happening in the market, what was happening with the customers, what the customers' demands were. So they were getting ahead of the game. Instead of being reactionary and just trying to fix what was obviously in our faces, they were able to get ahead and say, this is where we need to be in the market. This is where we want to be, and putting that vision in place for those product segments. And they were the ones setting the storylines for the Agile teams, and then the Scrum Master, of course, was having to facilitate all that to happen.
Right.
And importantly, because what we would before was that what we were trying to do was setting a whole bunch of priorities. So each time our strategy team would sit together, we'd see a big long spreadsheet, a list, and that list grew without fail every single time, with the promise that we've got to shrink this list. And every single time we'd look at our 100 odd on that list and say, what are our absolute must-dos in this next quarter, and what are the ones that we can not do? And without fail, we'd usually end up with more on the must-dos than we actually, with a list that was at least 4 times longer than we could ever achieve in the time frames that we had. So what the product owners helped us do is prioritise that list with alignment to strategy, because then they could align it to the customer, to the future needs of the customer.
What, during this time, there was a lot of change. How did people in the business react to the change? Different
reactions all over the place. So some people are very good at collaborating, and they took to it really well, like a duck to water. Others tend to like to just get on and do their thing, and they struggled. Naturally, because they're now having to work in a team, and so the team is having a daily stand-up, and then they're having weekly meetings, and then they're having Scrum Masters having to gather and to say, right, how did we go yesterday and how are we going today? So everyone's work is becoming more and more transparent. And some people don't like that either. They're uncomfortable feeling that they're getting monitored every day. But as a team, if you can get the culture right and you can get the team believing that they can make a difference, then they work so well as a team and they want to achieve it. And they also get ahead of the problems because they recognise the problems before they're at them, so they can have the Scrum Master going away and working to solve some of those problems before and get on with what they can get on with. So whereas what we had before would be that a task may be completed, but then it would get handed over, and then it would get done when where the group that needed to do it had time to do it. So everything was taking forever, whereas now we can do things with quite quickly.
You mentioned the culture. Do you think that going on this agile transformation has helped to improve the culture or influence the culture in some way?
Yes, but they go hand in hand.
Right.
So if we don't get the culture right, or we don't facilitate the people willing to be part of this process, then actually it won't work. So we've got to have a good, strong culture to allow Agile to go really well. At the same time, though, get Agile working well, it absolutely fosters a great culture.
In terms of the journey and the progression of this Agile transformation, how have you seen this progress through from getting the Scrum Masters, the alignment with the CTO, and then the product owners in place, the tribes as well?
Yep.
How is that move for you now, and where are we in this journey?
So one of the things that we've been trying to achieve, which is where you mentioned tribes, is that we want to have... so Voyager has a whole big range of product sets, and some of those product sets fit brilliantly under the umbrella of having a premium internet type strategy. However, things like a domains has a whole bunch of specialist needs. So what we were concerned with is that those products may not get some of that specialist attention. So we wanted tribes where they become a business unit within our business. And then we have a group of people with a clear focus on a particular product setting, a product grouping. That allows the so you can have a finance person in there, you can have your billing person in there. So that means the whole process of engagement from end to end for a customer and for the processes from marketing all the way through to billing gets attention from the right people in the business, so that it becomes a much more organised affair.
Right, so that the tribes are very self-managing and have the vision to move forward.
As we speak, no, but yes, that's exactly where we want to get. That's the plan. So at the moment, it's still in its infancy, where one of the challenges we're faced with at the moment is the financials aren't mature enough to allow us to give them a really good visibility into all their details. We can do it to a direct contribution level, but then, of course, things like how do you allocate costs of an office and things like that, those things we're just staying away from at the moment, but that's where we need to get to, so that when the sum of all these tribes will equal the sum of the total performance of the company. And then these business units can actually own their own financials, and they can make decisions. They can make decisions on future products based on revenue opportunities, and they can make decisions on profitability because they can decide which products are generating a better gross profit for them.
How far away do you think that we might be from that vision?
I think we're probably 12 months of maturity to get everyone understanding financials, because you've got to remember that for most part, most people don't actively own financials. They may understand the rudimentaries of it, but their ability to interrogate a set of financials and ask the right questions, be able to drill down to understand where those costs are coming from, is not. You usually rely on the accountants or the finance team to do so, but really what you want is your business managers to do that, because they're the ones that actually understand those costs. The accountant can tell them who's charged them what, but it's important that the business managers can interrogate all that information. And so we're really training up a group of people to try and take ownership of a financial performance. And that's quite different to where we are now.
Yeah. Well, so where do the business managers sit in these tribes? Because there's a line of people management, and then there's tribes where collaborative teams are working cross-functionally and within their own tribe, etc.
So this is part of the Agile, where we have all the cross-functional teams and groups. So we have an executive structure that works in your traditional mythology of direct reporting lines, and they are grouped by function. So you've got your operations, you've got your HR, you've got your finance, and you've got your growth team and technology. And the executives that are running that, we've divorced them from strategy, as in that group are responsible for operations. They need to run all the people well. We need to make sure we've got all the hygiene factors going well, the culture's great, and things like that, recruitment, so forth. Then we have a strategy group. It includes the executive team, but then we have the other key elements, because if we look at our executive team, you've got a representative of finance, HR, technology, and one in customer and operations. So you've got equal weighting there, arguably. Whereas what we want from a strategy is a strong focus on it for the customer, and we want a strong focus on the technology, because primarily we're a technology company.
Exactly.
So in order to be able to deliver what the customer needs are to be the future, we need to have technology completely aligned to it. And so what we wanted as a strategy group was the weighting towards the customer and technology. So what we've got now is a strategy team, which includes the executive team, and we have our two product owners, and then we have the lead architect. So now we've got a bigger group. Oh, and we also include our key stakeholder, C.E.O, who owns the organisation, and he's really our visionary. So C.E.O doesn't so much get involved in operations, but what he does do, he's constantly challenging the business. He's constantly looking across the horizon and seeing where the opportunities lie. And that's what he brings to that. He's challenging us, because it's so easy when you're running a business like this that you just get stuck with the things that are coming at you now. You're trying to fix all the squeaky wheels. And he's sitting there seeing, he's not having to bother with the squeaky wheel, but he is looking to see where the future holds for us and wants to position us right.
And how do you work with that? So in your role as CEO and CB as the visionary that comes in, how's that dynamic work?
That's probably one of the harder parts of the business. Working with entrepreneurs is always hard, and I've done it a few times in my career. And CV loves the phrase of to get to the moon, you've got to aim for the stars. And so... And the challenge with that is that's how an entrepreneur and CB will think. And so he's constantly not bothering himself with all the hard work or the challenges that are to get there. It's just like, let's get there.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the majority of us have our heads kind of firmly grounded, and we like to have a plan and a path that we know we can walk. So trying to map out a plan to the moon and not get too stuck in the stars is a balancing act. And tribes actually, I think, which is where I want us to go with, is that we can actually put some of those visionary and some of those shoot for the star material in the tribes, because then they can relate it to a particular product. Rather than actually as a whole entity, it can get a little bit lost, because we've got so many products and different customer segments. However, if we want to have challenges on the business within those tribes, it could be broken down to certain product segments or certain customer segments. And then they, in turn, can be trying to shoot for the stars. And as a small group, they could probably achieve it.
More with Alf in a minute. Growth is a podcast about people, their stories, their challenges, and how they help to shape technology for all of us. We've kicked off our show with a series of episodes dedicated to Voyager's own journey into becoming an agile company. I interview a variety of people within Voyager and ask them why they do what they do, and usually we have a good time talking about it. If you like this episode, follow us on your favorite podcast app. You'll get new episodes as they come out, and you can also catch up on older episodes too, such as my interview with Agile coach Tim Phillips, where we discussed creativity at Pixar, Agile consulting, and Red Bull all-nighters. And now, back to my conversation with Alf. Looking at across the business, you have an investment in people, in products, and technology. There's a lot of things going on at any one time. You're juggling a lot of things. How do you find your focus at any one point?
The focus tends to move around a little bit, but primarily it's keeping clear on the goals that we're trying to achieve and making sure we've got the right people on board to do it. So the secondary one, getting the right people on board to do it, is the hardest, and I've never seen it so hard as it is now. In 30-odd years of recruiting or being involved in recruiting people, I've never seen it this difficult.
Why do you think that is?
I suspect and talking around to some other people, it's primarily because people tend to work on hygiene factors. So what is something like compensation is typically a hygiene factor where it's not necessarily a great motivator. What keeps us motivated is the excitement of the goals and the challenges. And once one thing like a compensation's been met, yeah, you're satisfied, but that satisfaction may not solve the other problem. So what may have triggered someone to just get curious about maybe taking a new role or looking around in the market may have been money, or it may have been career opportunities. And maybe they've been there for 2-3 years and they're just feeling like having a sniff around what opportunities on the other side of the fence. Whereas what we've got now is that it seems that job security has become people's primary factor. So the reasons, all those other factors that may have got them interested in looking have gone. And they're only really concerned about, I want to make sure my job is secure because we're dealing in such an uncertain world at the moment with COVID. And so because of all the COVID stuff's going on, business confidence is still relatively low, or certainly at a culture level, they're better with the devil they know, because there's been so many news of companies failing or the risk of companies failing that they're all feeling a little bit apprehensive.
Do you feel that tension is really still in the air?
On an employment phase, it is, because we can see that if the roles that we're recruiting for at the moment, there's just so few applicants coming through. Normally you'd get a bunch of people from those that have overqualified to completely underqualified, but we're just not seeing that at the moment. So people, if they've got a role, are staying put. So typically you might be talking to someone that there's been a shift in their role and they've been forced to go look for. But the people that are just sniffing around, no, that's just not happening at the moment. Now, business confidence in the news is sounding like it's beginning to improve, so maybe that'll happen shortly.
When you're looking at recruits, or maybe you're not looking yourself, what's probably the most important thing that would look for to bring people into the company?
Mindset. Attitude is this probably the single biggest factor. A lot of people will be trying to sell themselves, so it's trying to actually, when you do interview, it's trying to get past that point and actually see what makes them tick, what their interests are, and then a mindset to really want to do well and be part of a success formula.
Yeah.
And that's what we're looking for, because when times get tough or something happens, like as we had COVID, everyone pulled together. Everyone felt a common need to get on and make happen. We had, through that first lockdown, we nailed so many projects that had been just sitting in the wings for months and months, and in that 6-8 week period, they got put to bed. It was just fantastic in that regard. It was a sense of urgency from everyone. There was a sense of desire to get this done. Everyone was feeling probably stressed that every company around the whole country was at risk. And so it pulled them together. And it's a bit like, I think, what we've heard before in the past of that war mentality. You know, even though London was getting bombed to hell, they all pulled together and still felt good about they were actually making a difference.
So how do you get that same mentality without the war?
That's an ongoing battle. As an execs, we're constantly we're doing surveys, we're constantly looking at which groups need support, or trying to understand why their culture isn't as good as it was the previous one. And there's always different reasons for it. Sometimes it's as simple as you've got an individual that's managed to just find themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it's impacting the whole team. And you've just got to be able to somehow be able to fix that, turn the person around, or put them into a different role if need be.
You know, being an agile company, do you think that extends to the executive team as well? The CEO, the CFO,
Agile has much bigger demands on certain parts of the business than it does. So the CFO needs to be very supportive of it, accommodating, but what it means for them is more around putting the tools in place, around the financial tools and all the other reporting tools to ensure that those teams can actually operate well as cross-functional teams. And that's consistent with when we adopted Agile. As they started to mature, they started asking for all the tools. They instead of previously just having tools that would allow them to do their role within their silos, suddenly they needed a whole new set of tools to see a very different outlook on what they were doing. So that's a CFO needs to be able to supportive of that type of approach, whereas the technology department are suddenly finding themselves involved in a whole bunch of things that they weren't involved in before because they're now in cross-functional groups and they've got to dedicate some time into that cross-functional group. And at times that's frustrating for them because they're involved in things that just don't make sense to them and they don't really want to be involved in. And that's where Agile needs to mature, which is still maturing within our own organisation, so that they aren't necessarily bogging those people down and those people are seeing the value of why they're there.
How often do you find yourself with the teams, with the tribes, doing the work? Well, that are doing the work, rather.
That's an interesting question because Agile requires self-management. And that means as execs, one of the hardest part was for the execs to stay away.
So I see.
That took actually quite a bit of training, so it was an interesting question.
How did you manage to do? How did you tackle that?
That was hard, and the hardest part was actually trying to deal with the likes of CB who just wanted to go down and work with the developers, and we had to pull them right out of the business and say, no, no matter what you say, CB, they're going to agree with you. And that's hard to understand sometimes as an exec because often as an exec, you get to a point where they will challenge. Well, their way of challenging is trying to get a reaction, and that will get turned as an instruction by default sometimes, and so that's what we had to avoid. And so these Agile teams need to operate without exec presence and even management presence so that they become self-managing. They have the confidence to get on and question themselves and ask to make sure that they've got the right storylines so that they can actually deliver the right outcomes.
What's next, do you think, for us in the next, say, 5 years?
Tribes, it will be a big factor for us. Getting that so that they start operating as not independent, but certainly as separate business units so that they will have their own maybe mission statements, they'll have their own goals, and they will work together well as a team. Allowing that to mature at the same time, providing all the strong infrastructure around your billing systems, everything else that they can share, but those systems will actually provide the needs of all those groups. That's where it's going to start getting a little bit challenging because as those tribes mature, they're going to have demands on our systems that we won't be able to deliver on right now. And then trying to be able to deliver and meet those demands will be hard without maybe causing some conflict with other tribes.
Right, so more disruption through more growth. Do you think
always growth?
Always growth. Do you think that any companies working in technology who are not agile can still thrive?
Agile is an element of the way of the future. It's not going to suit every business. It doesn't suit every business at all. And an element of it will be the size of the organisation. So Voyager at 100 staff, we're in that danger zone. So danger zone being that if you're under if you're under 30 staff, it's relatively easy for a manager to stay very much in touch with everything that's going on in the business. If you imagine if it's 10 staff, it's a breeze. And then if it's 20, you can manage it with some structure. 30, again, you can manage it with some structure and you can stay on top of everything. You can generally know all your costs and got a pretty good understanding of everything that's going on, how profitability the products are and all the rest. When you get to 100 staff, you're in that space where you're not really big enough to have super strong governance that are going to be trying to put a whole bunch that you end up with execs rather that are very hands off because that's their role. 100% is execs. Where at 100 staff, you've actually got execs that need to be hands on as well as be the executive, and that's where it gets hard. And so we're in that danger zone. That's where Agile works so well for us because we can actually have the execs removed from a lot of that hands-on stuff and still be hands-on in their silo. And then you've got the cross-functional teams to deliver the outputs and managing and self-managing their own deliveries.
In the ideal future, once these tribes and teams are self-managing, how do you see your role? And potentially, what would you add to Voyager once everyone's doing their own thing very, very well?
That's dream state. So quite frankly, if you look at any CEO or any general manager's role, there are always fires and there are always challenges of growth and things like that. So that dream, everyone doing exactly what you'd like them to do, all that will do is discover one part of our design wasn't as good as we needed it to be, and we're back trying to actually fix something out. So I don't see that state ever happening. The key for me is recognising people's skills that they can bring to particularly the executive table and even the management level, and making sure we've got really good people in that space. And the skills have to be different. It's not about vanilla. We want all the different flavours in that way and get them to work as a team. That's an area that I try and work on, and that we can accommodate sometimes individuals that have unique skill sets and they don't always fit brilliantly into teams, but they just can bring so much more.
With a great attitude.
With a great attitude every time. Yeah.
So when you're not at work being the CEO, putting out fires and doing every other millions of things, what do you do? What do you like to do?
Well, of course, it's home life. That's usually not too bad.
Yeah.
But fishing's a passion and diving's a passion.
Oh, nice.
So I get out and do a bit of fishing with a few friends, and my daughter's been getting into the diving and she loves it. She's trying to convince me at the moment to spend some money on some camera gear for her so she can get more into her underwater photography.
Oh, let me tell you, that is that is a money pit right there. But
I'm learning. I know. I'm beginning to understand that. I got her thinking about the dollars more so by agreeing that she has to contribute at least a third of it.
Okay.
So
That's
now she's a bit more cautious.
Yeah.
Up until then, it was like, the world was her oyster.
Underwater photography is a beautiful thing. Tell me, what are some good diving spots?
Poor Knights would undoubtedly be one of my most favourite. And the variety of sea life there is spectacular, and there are so many different spots. There are creatures there that we just don't even realise are in our New Zealand waters, and they're just in your face. The moment you hop underwater there, they're
crazy close.
And I can't understand how often when I run into people that they've never been there from New Zealand. It's a 30-minute boat ride from land.
I've never been.
Yeah, and they've got great facilities there just to take people out. Anyone's never even dived. They make it so easy.
You can free dive there.
You can free dive there, but the boats, they've got it sussed. They have little platforms at the back of their boat, so you can just sit waist deep and put your flippers on, get accustomed to the water, and then just slide into the water without even feeling concerned.
If you're ever having a challenging day, you can think back to the Poor Knights diving. Alf, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. You're welcome. Enjoyed it.
That's it for this episode from our Agile series. The Growth Podcast is a production from Voyager Internet. The show was produced, edited, and mixed by me. Transcription by Josh Yates. Special thanks to my guest, Alf Wallis. If you like this episode and would like to hear more, follow us on your podcast app. If you feel like taking a leaf out of Alf's book, then go and hop on that 30-minute boat ride out to the Poor Knights for a dive. In fact, why haven't you gone already? There's no excuse. Until next time, peace.